It is. Okay. So I would like to thank the organizers for putting us on this wonderful program. There were fascinating papers, and now it's ours. No, I'm kidding. So this paper is called Corporate Actions as Moral Issues. It's joint work with Elisabeth, who is at HBS. And it really takes its starting point in the exploding interest that we have seen in the issue of ESG. That's true across all fields, and finance is certainly not an exception. But what was exceptional is that this exploding interest has really moved the needle and has gotten finance scholars to at least some of them, at least some of the very prominent ones, like the people I have on the slide here, Pastor Stambo and Taylor, to actually do something that is very rare. That is, we take, for example, the standard portfolio choice framework that has been with us since Markowitz, and we're shifting it around. And the way we're shifting it around or changing it is we're adding a new term to the utility function. So we used to be thinking about financial benefits from forming your portfolio, and now we're adding what people call non-pecuniary utility. So it's cool. It took 60 years for us to do that, and it took ESG for us to do that. Now, that is justified to a degree. If you do surveys, you survey retail investors, you survey institutional investors, what you find is that a substantial fraction, not all of them, but a substantial fraction of them said we care about ESG issues, and a significant fraction of those who say they do say we care about those issues because of ethical concerns, because we think it's the right thing to do. Okay, so generically what you have in those models is something like a taste for ESG. And a lot of papers leave it at that. And what our starting point is to say, okay, so if this is what we're doing, and if this is the route we want to go, then, if I were a CEO and I would care about non-pecuniary utility of, say, my shareholders, and I would want to induce corporate actions that are addressing those, I would like to know, what do we mean when we say non-pecuniary utility? Which of my actions as a firm is actually affecting this non-pecuniary utility? If I have 10 things I could do, but I can't do all 10 of them, which ones would I like to prioritize? And our reading of the literature is that, at least in finance, and this may be a case where finance is behind the curve, but at least in finance, we have pretty much no idea about this. I mean, we have some ideas, there is some notable work, but usually this work takes individual actions and looks at individual stuff. And what we don't have is work that is looking at a broad range of actions, and this is what our paper wants to do. So, simple questions like which firms' attributes generate non-pecuniary utility? How do these concerns rank relative to financial motives? What about heterogeneity in those preferences across people? Those are all open questions. And what we do is something extremely simple. It's actually the simplest thing we could think of, but it took us a while to figure out that this might be a useful approach to go about it. We just run a big survey and ask people. Okay, so it's a very, very simple paper. If we're right, though, then it's simple, but perhaps has valuable stuff in it that might be pretty impactful for how we set up our models in finance, how we should teach finance, and how we should think about corporate actions if we're CEOs. Okay, I don't want to. So before I even go there, I don't want to, of course, overstretch what we're doing. I think what we try and do is contribute a useful first step, but this is not nearly the last word on this. This is like, we view this as one sensible first step in a big research agenda that we hope a lot of people will join in. Okay. We have a couple of main findings from our surveys. I'll give you all the details later. But first, if we're looking at this broad range of corporate actions, we find that the stuff that motivated people to extend the standard model, which is concerns about climate or diversity, things like that, they are perceived as moral issues, but they are not perceived as, the most salient moral issues. So what people think about or tell us in the survey, they view mostly and most importantly as moral issues are things like the treatment of workers and high CEO pay, and not so much workforce diversity and clean energy usage. So there's a question about the relative, what should we prioritize? The second thing that we try and get at in a very simple way is trade-offs. So if it were your money on the line, and if you had to pay some money for the firm to do the right action, how much would you be willing to give up? And what would be the substitution rate that you would be willing to incur? Because that's what's inside this utility function, of course, that people are giving up money for the morally desirable action. And the question is, can we say anything on those trade-offs? And in our case, we find that for a $100 increase in personal cost, the share of respondents in favor of a moral action decreases by 3.3%. I'll come back to that number. But that is an interesting number because it matches with some prior work in different settings, which finds similar exchange rates, which extends the hope that there may really be something like a rate of substitutions for morals that has some empirical content to it. Last thing, we have a randomized shareholder treatment, and we find that shareholders report a greater willingness to pay for morally desirable corporate actions than customers or employees. So trying to get at a bit, who would be most likely to be champions of that change. Okay. As I said, very simple survey. We use Qualtrics to get us a sample that's roughly representative of the US population across a few salient characteristics: gender, age, race, ethnicity. This is conducted last year in June. As we speak, we're running a second wave of that survey. So, to the extent that you don't like what I'm presenting to you, there is at least a fighting chance that our new wave will have something in there that convinces you more. We, of course, try to, cross all T's and dot all I's. We're also doing a few additional things that we find interesting. Perhaps I'll get to those in the discussion later on. So the important thing to realize is what we're trying to do is look at a range of things. And the way we go about it is really from the classroom. Okay, so we're corporate finance, we teach corporate finance, so we open up really Myers, the standard textbook, and take out standard actions, standard stuff that we would find in their textbook, and we would teach to our students. And the interesting thing is, to us, that we usually never think about morals. I don't know about you in your teaching. Do you talk about moral stuff? We usually don't. We say, if NPV is positive, you do it. If NPV is negative, you don't do it. And so I'm going to show you the 11 corporate actions. The order of those is randomized. Important to notice, they're all legal and positive NPV. So this is not, bad stuff that firms do. This is positive NPV legal stuff, which, at least in my classroom, I would tell people that's what you should do. And then last thing, we randomly assign people to a stakeholder treatment group: customers, employees, shareholders. I'll be coming back to that in a second. Okay. I don't have time to go into all the details of the scenarios, but we ask people on, for example, layoffs. So we say, okay, the firm is thinking about laying off shareholders. The management argues this increases the share price. So it's that type of scenario that we have in mind. We have 3 classic ESG topics. One is on diversity, the other is on renewable energy usage, and one is on board independence. To tie our hands a little bit, we copy this from a Stanford survey with very little addition. So we try to not rig this against those alternatives, and we complement this with standard corporate financing stuff. Okay, What we then do is we ask people on a scale from 1 to 5, tell us your agreement with this is purely a financial decision when evaluating if morals should play no role. This is morally wrong. And then rate these items relative to each other, how much they represent moral issues on a scale from 1 to 5. Okay, so again, very simple, very straightforward stuff. Then we have trade-offs. I'll be coming to the trade-offs in a second. So let me show you results. So the first result is this. If you ask people, is this a moral issue? And remember, we're talking about layoff decisions, leverage decisions, outsourcing decisions, diversity. What we find is that across the board, these things are perceived to be moral issues. The mean is 3.35. The question is, what should your null hypothesis be? Well, if you're like me in my classroom, the null hypothesis should be that probably everybody clusters at the 1. Those are just standard corporate finance textbook things. There's no morals in that, so why should morals matter? Then we would be here. Another null hypothesis could be, well, Oliver, you're asking them a bunch of stuff they don't care about, so with a 5-point Likert scale, they're always picking the middle. That would mean we should see the 3 coming up. Statistically, this is not what's happening. People are more to the right, which is the moral side. So they seem to perceive these things as moral issues. What is, to us, what's very interesting is that if you take out diversity and renewable energy, sort of the classic ESG things that motivate people to look at non-pecuniary utility to start with, those are perceived as less of a moral issue than the other stuff. That to us is interesting because it means that, if those other things prompt us to extend the standard model, then perhaps we should have been doing this all along and not waited 60 years from Markowitz. Okay, we can look at this in various ways. So here are the individual scenarios. You see the top 2 scenarios, and they'll pop up over and over again, is CEO pay. This is perceived as a moral issue, and laying off everything that has to do with the worker. Laying off workers, outsourcing, reducing wages, that is stuff that has a moral component. Diversity and renewable energy, nowhere near the top. Ask, is this morally wrong? Note, very similar ordering. It's not the same, but it's very similar. Most people say, or more people say, these actions are morally wrong on average than the opposite. In the paper, everything is disaggregated, so sorry for going quickly over this. And then directly to the classroom, if you evaluate this, should you evaluate this as a financial thing or a moral thing? Me in the classroom, there's not even a talk about morals. It's obviously financial. If you take a Friedmanite position, it has to be financial. But we don't see this at all. Only 10% strongly agree with the statement that this is purely a financial decision and that morals should play no role. And again, renewable energy, diversity, nowhere near the top. These findings are in contrast to the focus on the ESG debate. And one thing we found interesting is that if you ask what are CEOs incentivized on, they're incentivized on, well, Babchuk and Roberto are looking at CEO compensation contract, and they find that with respect to employees, most companies choose goals related to inclusion or diversity, and they focus on work accident and illness, but none incentivizes the CEO to increase salaries or benefit or improve job security. But it's precisely those things that our survey participants tell us they feel are important moral issues. Okay, we have a lot of heterogeneity from our survey I'd love to tell you about. I don't have time, but let me just say that there is some, I would argue, plausible heterogeneity in the data. So more concerned about morals are Democrats, females, older people. There's an intuition that younger people care more about morals. That's not true across the board. The older people care more about morals. That's not just our paper. That's also a Hart and Singalis paper that finds the same thing. But it's also interesting that Democrats, for example, they especially like diversity in renewable energy, but only sort of compared with Republicans. The interesting finding is that there's less heterogeneity in relative rankings than in absolute rankings, which means that all subgroups, Democrats, Republicans, old, young, agree that CO pay ranks towards the top and renewable energy and diversity rank towards the bottom. It's not like everything flips. That can be good news if we're COs, right? It seems like the ordering is similar across people, even though the level shifts depending on who you are. Yeah, people with econ-related degrees are interesting because we have the same moral makeup than other people. But if you ask us, should you judge things based on finance or morals? Economists, well, and now, either we've been really successful and we sort of brought people to think about finance, and that's the right thing to do, so it's a teaching success, or this is societal dynamite in the sense that people do care about morals, but we're teaching people that this is all stuff you shouldn't care about, but then the people that are leading our corporations are not only thinking about finance, whereas other people are thinking only about, not only, but also about morals. Trade-offs, just to give you some flavor, the way we introduce this is we randomly vary a cost. This is all, this version is not incentivized. In the new wave, we have some form of incentivizing. This is purely hypothetical. If the company decided to pay all taxes domestically, prices of their products would be higher. These measures would result in you spending $100 more this year at their shops. Would you be in favor of the company paying all taxes domestically? That's just an example. We do this for every scenario. And by that, we get an exchange rate. And this is randomly assigned. This follows Hartz, Gadinis, and Teschmar, who are doing basically the same thing. So what we find is that if there's no cost, then the majority of people say, yeah, do the moral thing. And it's pretty much the same for shareholders, employees, and customers. Once you're introducing a cost, then the number or the fraction of people who say implement the moral action decreases, which tells you that even though it's hypothetical, there's at least some respondents to these costs. What is interesting is that the average cost elasticity is similar to that estimated by Hart, Teschmar, and Gadinis in a totally different setting. And what is also interesting is that shareholders are least sensitive to the costs. If you're introducing this hypothetical private cost, it's the shareholders that are least sensitive. So bring it all together, where does this leave us? To our knowledge, this is the first study that looks at a broad set of standard corporate finance scenarios, stuff that we routinely teach to students. We find that the treatment of workers and pay inequality are perceived to be more of a moral issue than recently emphasized ESG issues, diversity, renewable energy. Shareholders report a greater willingness to pay. And as I said, this is super simple. This is the first step. But I think we found a lot in there that made us think, like, should we write these models with these non-pecuniary terms only for climate? Or should we also do this for layoffs or CO pay? And I should say in this audience, I almost forgot, if you recall Babchuk and Fried, pay without performance, they have the outrage constraint. And in a sense, this is completely consistent with the outrage constraint. It's just that at least in finance, I'm not aware of many people modeling that stuff. Perhaps we should have, okay? Those are open questions. I'm not saying we should, but as instructors in my course, should I talk about morals? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should necessarily. I'm just saying if we're starting to go down that route, and if you take our survey evidence, then perhaps we should. Okay, perhaps we should think about these things more carefully. And if I'm a CEO and if I wanted to implement this, which are the issues that I should start with? And I think our ordering is a bit different than what many gut feelings would be. All right, that's what I had. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me to comment on this fascinating paper. And I have to say, I agree that, as Oliver just explained, that the main premise of the paper is that moral considerations arise on all corporate actions, not just the ESG ones. And to me, this sounds like a very worthy claim. Participants are willing to trade off monetary gain for moral concerns, and especially shareholders, and I'll come to that finding later on. One interesting thing that the paper points out is that it's not just the millennials, but mostly older white, I guess, women. And then that findings append key tenets of corporate theory. So let me start by contrasting this paper to Jill's paper that we just heard. I hate disappointing Jill, but I have to do it. Jill's argument is that we can actually distinguish between something that is political and non-political, and this paper makes the kind of the opposite claim that everything is kind of political or moral. And that's the real value of the paper, that the morality of corporate choices is a topic that I don't think we have studied or understood very well. And that's why the paper is very important. But it's kind of surprising that we haven't studied it, because moral condemnations of corporate choices are ubiquitous, or moral approvals. I'm sure that all of you, just like we were discussing at lunch Elon Musk, you were discussing Musk too, and there were a lot of moral condemnations going around. But you hear them from activists, from politicians, from the press, Obama in 2008 about AIG bonuses, Trump and the Muslim ban. So you can find examples of that everywhere. Now, the paper expands moral considerations to be embedded in many business decisions. And the main argument is that traditional corporate law issues like CEO pay or layoffs should feature in our discussion. Now, so this is what I like about the paper, and now I have to become the commentator and kind of start quibbling with aspects of the paper. So forgive me for that. First question, why are we interested in sampling the general population? And that's, I think, something that needs more justification. Because the general population obviously doesn't have any decision-making role in corporate law. It's shareholders that vote. So why exactly their views matter is something that we need to unpack a little bit. And particularly because there might be some discussions about the reason we care about their views is exactly because they're financial. Because maybe they want to pander to reputation reasons or consumer reasons, or because it's profit maximizing, or do we care about that because we believe that investors themselves get influenced by the views of the population? That is actually a moral reason. So that's something that I was wondering about. And then I was actually wondering whether some of the prompts and the discussion were things that a sample of the general population can really understand. Dividends, board independence, leverage, and incentive pay. Let me tell you that it takes me a while to explain that to my BA students, which are probably smarter than the general population. So I don't know how much, so to what extent I'm wondering to what extent participants actually could really, or all of them could really understand what was going on. And then one other concern might be whether we expect the general population to be more hostile to corporate choices compared to shareholders. They're not invested in corporations. They don't have anything to gain. A lot of them maybe see corporations as their opponents, as their employers maybe sitting on the other side of the table from them, or people that impact their loved ones or their communities in ways they don't like. So maybe the general sentiment in the population would be more hostile compared to shareholders. Now, so another question is about the kind of survey, another set of questions about the survey questions and what they ask. If you ask someone whether something is moral, is it moral that CEOs get paid so much? I would expect that the answer to that would be, yes, it is a moral issue, and probably yes, it is morally wrong, especially if if the question of, depending on how you understand morality, what is moral and what is the right thing, that might affect how you think about it. We're talking about my next point was about the full text of the prompt, and I didn't get it because I got another version. I was kind of quick in that, so sorry about this. But one comment that I had related to that is that in the paper, you report a lot of the relative answer, the relative figures, but I would be interested in also seeing the absolute figures to get a sense of how much that bias was, like how much everybody thought everything was moral, and that would help me get a better sense of kind of the outcomes in the survey. It would also give us a better sense of the magnitude of the effects that we're talking about. I was also wondering about one of the prompts, the ESG prompts about the environment. It focuses on renewable energy, which is really a narrow way of getting to the environmental prompts compared to, example, climate change, which I would expect it would get a much more kind of a stronger reaction. So that might explain a little bit why you find so little, why you find the morality of that so low compared to some of the other issues that you're discussing. Now, one of the most fascinating aspects for me, I don't know for you, for me, was that the issues that people find or rank as highly moral tend to track traditional political divides. So questions about CEO pay or layoffs or wage reduction or outsourcing would be what Sarah Palin would call jobs. Like it's all, if you, in some sort of a reductive version, these are all kind of considerations that you would expect the general survey of the population to tell you that this is the most important thing that they care about. And it's obviously a moral question because this is, and we know from politicians that this is what they're after. But at the same time, I don't know how to, it's interesting to see that people understand economic hurt as a moral issue. And that is a little confounding to me, and I was trying to get my mind around that they find that its economic impact to other stakeholders, perhaps, and they understand that as a moral issue. Now, one of the other kind of very interesting, divides that I saw is the male-female divide. It is, you didn't spend much time talking about it in the presentation, but it is so clear and across all the topics that it makes me wonder kind of what is driving it. And it's a little perplexing. So because it is such a strong result, I was hoping that you could offer some justification or some thoughts about it, because otherwise it seems to be a little kind of odd, kind of that something might be wrong with it. So I was wondering if you could expand on that. Now you get a lot of interest by saying it's older people that actually care more about those kind of more traditional moral issues, which is true in the survey, but it's also true that if you look at younger people, they do care about the renewable energy and diversity prompts compared to the rest of the population. So that general idea that millennials actually support ESG is true. Now, some other tidbits that Oliver didn't have a chance to talk about, but I liked, so I get a chance to talk about, is this about Republicans. There's one thing where that Republicans thing is immoral, and that's outsourcing, which is kind of very interesting and kind of gives a sense of like how difficult, how clear this divide is. And then the ethnic groups one is also very interesting to me because ethnic groups are generally less concerned about morality overall, which is, to me, suggests that this is probably evidence of class, given that it's uniform across ethnic groups, and it's not just one ethnic group. So that might be another breakdown that you might want to explore, kind of wealthier versus poorer people, if that's something that you have data on. I don't know. Now, let me move on to the experimental setting, concerns the random assignment of people to shareholder, employee, and customer groups. So that one, probably you can anticipate my reaction because you've tried to fix it in the second round, as I understand it, is that the question is, can participants really take home these roles without actually having any skin in the game, without them being actual shareholders, without actually having to pay anything? But having said that, I think that even as it is, your experiment actually says something, maybe not exactly the way you frame it, but what it does say is that the general population believes that shareholders should pay the cost. So that's how I want to understand this outcome, because you make them choose. Essentially, you're asking who should you pay the cost, and they're telling you shareholders. That I think is well, to me, it sounds like a more plausible interpretation of the results. Then I find the emphasis on the $100 increments surprising that it's the same with this other frame, but also needing some justification. Particularly as the costs of all these issues vary significantly, like why $100 on DEI are the same as $100 on climate. Like that is really weird, but I don't know if this is just a metric or if it's the moral self of the morality in me that is kind of rebelling, but I was wondering if you could explain that a little more. Okay. So implications and suggestions. As I said, I love the fact that you're expanding the inquiry. So I would develop the ESGs in everything line, and I would say that is there any benefit? So the real question is there any benefit or any outcome from corporations utilizing moral arguments to defend their practices? And that's something that I would find interesting. And maybe if you go down that path, one possibility would be to explore certain key corporate actions and find whether they use or not use moral and financial justifications, and they when they talk about it. And then another possibility would be in the experimental setting, try to test scenarios where the moral and financial implications go in opposite directions. I mean, you tried a little bit with so I'm really looking forward to see what you did in the second wave, because that's exactly, sounds like what you were trying to do. So that's all the comments from me. Thank you very much for the opportunity to read the paper. And I'm looking forward to read the revised version.
Thank you very much, Stavros. And Oliver, over to you for some comments while I take the cue.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for a very thoughtful discussion. Very briefly, I'm interested in your thoughts, and I see there's hands up. So let me very briefly say that the point about the general population is interesting. I mean, there's a couple of ways you can think about this. One is, obviously, it would be great to do the same thing with actual investors and actual firm, like fully incentivized. That'd be great. On the other hand, we think that the general population is interesting because there's also a lot of societal emphasis or attention on what are firms doing and how should we, do we endorse what these CEOs are doing? Do we like it? Don't we like it? So I think our paper is useful in that dimension, which does not, I think not quite in the works, but sort of it's clear that we would like to push it also towards different sets of investors and looking at that. That said, we do have investors in our survey, not in those questions. And for those investors, the ranking is the same. So even for those people that do hold shares in our survey, or the richer people, the ranking is different. The ranking is the same, the level is different, okay? So in that sense, I have a guess what comes out, but we will see what we can do if we have it. One of the things about a moral, if I ask you, is this a moral thing? And then you're like, well, what does moral even mean? And we know that philosophers have thought about this for ages and have not come up with a consensus answer. We're running the new version without the word moral. And we get the same basic, so we replace it with, you think it's right or wrong? And we get the same basic thing. Another thing that we also do is coming back to something that you said. Those were all positive NPV. We now also have negative NPV things. So we're looking at, is hiring the same as firing, stuff like this. And I think, perhaps I present this next time and have the pleasure to see you and perhaps I can tell you more about this. The very last thing, and there were so many great points, and sorry for not getting to all of those, but I just want to clarify. My point here today is not to say firms should go out and take a moral stance or something. My goal is sort of trying as a scientist to say, okay, if we're starting down to have these non-pecuniary utility terms in the utility function, what do we have to, how can we be internally consistent? That is our goal. I mean, I have my personal opinion, and we can talk about this over coffee if anyone is interested. But here it's about internal consistency for us as a profession. Okay, thank you.
Let's go over to questions. Let's take them in threes, and we've got probably about 9 questions, so you can decide how much you want to give back per 3 questions. So we're going to start with Martin, and then Jeff and Emiliano.
Thank you. So so in the United States, I think we are in a country where we are very much dependent for the stock market and how well it does for our retirement. And the longer I am here and the bigger my portfolio grows, the more shareholder premises I feel like I'm becoming. So I wonder to what extent you can see that in your data, because it seems like you have assigned the stakeholder groups randomly, but it seems like to me that the age would play a role, right? So I think there was some discussion of that, especially because I think the older people might have converted their portfolio into fixed income, and then their calculus might be different. And ethnicity, social class, what was said before, I think that would play a role. The other thought I would have is, how to transpose this into the international context, right? Countries where people are less dependent on the stock market for their long-term well-being, whether you have a sense, whether you've tried to do that elsewhere, whether there are results that match the ones you got from US respondents.
Well, this is really a point that channels notes that Emiliano and I have been sharing, and also a comment that Martin made, which is to say, if one is serious about the effort to use a survey to fill out this sort of data, the carefulness of selection, the folks who are going to be part of the group, right? And so, in a real, I mean, the Tesla's shareholders, the retail owners, just voted to give this man $45 billion. So much for the morality of CEO pay, right? Maybe it's all about incentives, but actually, what incentives? So the point being, if you're going to put this in a serious finance function, then it seems to me you really do need to pick a survey group that has real skin in the game. And it's sort of folks who own shares, maybe a block of shares, folks who, as Martin suggests, are near retirement, for whom, you know, the welfare trade-offs are real. You know, and it's, I mean, this is a kind of issue that, you know, is faced in cost benefit, right? So do you want to look at the way, I mean, sort of, I mean, a survey without a budget constraint, or, you know, revealed reference in job selection or other behavior? And, you know, I mean, it's really, how does one actually get at, in a realistic way, that investors care about this? And, you know, Oliver hasn't solved this. And it seems to me it's really worth doing. But I just think the survey strategy needs to be quite different before, you know, many folks are going to say you've actually been able to shed light on the way that folks who have real skin in the game are prepared to make a trade-off in a way that a manager making a choice ought to pay attention to.
Anu.
Jeff already made some of the points I was thinking of making, but if you're thinking of reweighting things, first of all, you could perhaps just use your data and reweight things so that the distribution more closely mimics the distribution of shareholders. You wouldn't even need to redo the whole exercise with a different sample, so that's straightforward. But I guess in terms of how things actually work in real life, that wouldn't get far enough, because we know that in real life, 30% of the shares are voted by like 4 people sitting in the proxy voting groups of BlackRock, Vanguard, Fidelity, and State Street. So that's your sample. And then another 10% of the shares are voted by people, by the folks who call the shots at ISS and Glass Lewis. So basically half of the votes are cast by literally peaceful people. Now, going back to one thing Stavros mentioned, do these guys even get it? And one thing that I found somewhat striking in your figures was that the thing that people seem to find the most morally wrong is CEO pay. And the thing that people seem to find the least morally wrong is incentive pay. So there's some degree of tension there. How do you interpret that?
I mean, on that, you know, I mean, I did not show you the full prompt. So one is basically just paying a bonus to your employee, and the other is saying you have a CEO that makes 40 million, which is sort of the average numbers from the S&P 500. So this is the difference. So
Oliver, do you want to make more comments, or do you want us to keep going? Because I radically underestimated the number of questions. We've got 8 more questions and comments.
So let me just say 2 words so I don't forget. And investors, as I said, it would be great to have actual investors. We do have investors, and as you said, you know, we can zoom in on the investors we do have. Those guys do have skin in the game, not necessarily in those companies. That would be, of course, the gold standard, that we actually let them vote on something where they actually are the shareholders, and we randomly assign that. Paul Smith and co-authors in the RFS do have a paper that gets closer to that. Because the question is, if you do this hypothetical stuff, is that all just, you know, people say anything, but once they have skin in the game, they don't. What they show is that for actual investors in the Dutch pension fund, they are voting, and this is an actual vote for actual money. They are voting to have what we would call the moral thing implemented, or what you would otherwise called the non-pecuniary ESG thing, implemented. So there is at least evidence in the literature that, you know, if you come at this and say, oh, this is a survey, it is nonsense, I don't think that's the right way to view this. And then, you know, ISS, Glass-Steagall, you know, the people who vote, are they more or less moral? It's not even clear, right? It's like perhaps they're overemphasizing certain issues and underemphasizing others. It would be fantastic to look at. You know, that's a tough one to get at. So yeah, let me just say one more thing. So the one thing that we do in the new version is one way to get at a bit of the skin in the game thing is. We let people play dictator games. And so, you know, this is a different setting. So this is a proof by correlation, basically. But what we show is that those people that are willing to leave money on the table for pro-social things in the dictator game, those are the same that say they care about moral things in our survey. Again, it's not, is that perfect? No. Is that completely consistent with our story? I would argue yes.
We've got Yair, Kobe, and Roy. If everyone can keep comments concise.
I'm wondering how much people's vision of right and wrong corresponds with whether the positive NPV is from redistribution. So let's say, so the idea is the company makes 100, but the stakeholders lose 120. Versus if instead you said the company makes 100 and the stakeholders lose 1. I imagine the answers would be different. And that's a very particular type of morality. That'd be a very utilitarian, measured in dollars type of morality. But I do think it's relevant. I don't think it's a whole story. But right now, I don't see that in there.
Kobe.
So this is great, and I know, Scott and I tried to did something also about shareholder preferences, and so I know the pain of going through it and all the attacks and external validity. I'm totally with you, but I'm exactly want to push on that point as well because they are important. So if you look at your sample, you see that 50% of the people are unemployed, around 50% of them. Only 50% are employed. They are retired people, they are students, they are unemployed. About 50% are employed. If you look, you see that 10% of the people earn above 110K, and theoretically, 90% of the people could earn something between 50 to 60K. Again, we can't figure it out on the data. And if we take this into account, then we might understand the results. I mean, they care about payments because they are unemployed. They have all of those strong feelings. They don't care a lot about the environment because they have other worries on their head. So I guess here, the questions goes back to who is the sample, who are the people, what can we infer from it? I think the second point, and this is something that, Scott and I also, worked a lot on it, is the incentives, right? It's clear that here, and God, it can be a cheap talk. So my sense is that some of them, they reacted to your manipulation. But what happens if they have to actually, if you put them some money on the table and they have to lose, $3, $5, given the population, given the characteristic, my sense is that the result could be totally different. And the last point on, again, say on pay results, most of them are actually approved. Again, it goes back to Emiliano points, what the shareholders, what the deciders, but most of them, the vast majority of them, not just Elon Musk compensation, are approved by shareholders. So how does it fit also with what we see on reality and high shareholder votes?
Thanks, Oliver. I wanted to shift focus to the implications. So the fact that we get individuals telling us in surveys that they get more non-pecuniary utility from stuff such as outsourcing and CEO pay than from environmental sustainability doesn't mean that we should prioritize these issues over environmental sustainability in executive pay or what we teach in finance class. I mean, so go back to the Marco discussion of Pedro's paper. So the mother of all first-order problem right now is environmental sustainability. So, and the premise is that this is a collective action problem. So if I'm an individual worker or customer or shareholder, I probably feel like the decision of a single company that I'm associated with on carbon emissions will not do much impact. So I assign more non-pecuniary utility to other decisions. But from a societal perspective, what we teach in finance, how we design executive pay, it doesn't mean that these are the stuff that we need to prioritize, right?
Yes.
Got some people who haven't had a chance yet to ask them. I'm actually going to go to Kate and Claudia because you have not yet had questions.
All right, so I love this project, and I'm going to actually change this a little bit given the questions you've already had, because we're originally in the same theme. I mean, I wonder actually if the disconnect, rather than being a challenge, is both a challenge but also an opportunity, because it is quite striking that as we have these different tensions playing out right now in political fields relative to corporations, like a lot of it actually is around labor. I mean, like Jeff was criticizing, I think, understandably, the Biden tariffs on China. That, of course, started under Trump. Like one of the few areas we get bipartisan support is around labor. Paycheck protection program, like huge bipartisan support. So like, I mean, in some ways, like even if like you should do this for purposes of understanding what the significances are for corporate governance, the rest of the findings are actually incredibly interesting as well over kind of where the investor class and where the general population might be at. But the small thing on that, which is kind of separate, is it does seem like it's hard to put too much weight on the finding that people are inclined to pay for this as shareholders, but not as consumers or employees, because given your population, it does seem like $100 out of a paycheck, $100 out of pocket just sounds like it really hurts. Whereas like if they have some retirement savings, even if, and many of them don't, like they're gonna feel that potentially in a different way. So I would query how much weight to put into that particular finding.
Okay, and I will go back to the same set of questions before, just to say that some of these issues that you're treating as non-pecuniary, they do have very direct pecuniary consequences, right? So the CEO pay, the layoffs. So if whoever is answering this survey basically sees herself or himself represented in this, can obviously see any sort of pecuniary consequence of those. So it is somehow hard to disentangle the two, as there are going to be direct and indirect pecuniary consequences of some of these non-pecuniary decisions.
So I think a number of these questions are overlapping. So we've only got 3 more, and then we'll give you a couple of minutes and we won't take too much time out of coffee. I've got Scott, Jill, and Roberto, and then we are done with question comments. So Scott.
I had the same question as Emiliano about pay and incentives, so I cede my time.
Are hard, and they're hard because, as a number of people have kind of suggested, you don't know exactly what people are thinking when they're answering. So if people view themselves as affected by outsourcing or potentially affected by outsourcing, they're going to answer it differently. The same thing with respect to moral. I mean, I was sitting, while you were presenting, I was sitting there trying to think of what question could I be asked that I can't imagine a moral dimension to. I might not think there's a moral dimension to whether I go back tonight by subway, but I can imagine some people are thinking, well, I keep reading about congestion pricing and too many cars, and it really is a moral issue. I might not think that eating a hamburger is a moral decision, but clearly for my vegetarian friends it is, right? So, I guess I'm wondering if you can come up with questions, even in theory, that you think wouldn't generate the kind of answers that you're getting. And if you could, that might be a way of sort of testing the robustness of your results.
I was thinking about the contraposition you create between positive, negative NPV criteria and incorporating morality of this. And I haven't seen the actual questions, but this could all be like, as Yair, I think, hinted at, a distributional concern within positive NPV projects. So it's not clear that what the respondents are saying is that they are ready to sacrifice efficiency for morality. How do you want to call it? It's possible in the ranking of your preferences is kind of consistent with this. They are saying that companies should really prioritize a positive NPV, but the way the surplus gets divided must be fair. And the preferences you see are distributional preferences. I mean, Elon Musk would put the same, more or less the same amount of effort. It would be a positive NPV employment contract if he got 10 billion instead of 50 billion. So it's not really a trade-off between efficiency and equity, but it's an additional complementary distributional concern on how we distribute surplus. But it's not really a trade-off between surplus. Instead, the lower ranked preferences are all about externalities. So are all really about trade-offs between the decision maker and general welfare. So maybe the respondents are, more like welfareists, even Paretoists maybe, than it looks at first sight. Just a instinctual reaction.
You've got 2 minutes to close us out. No problem.
Wow. Okay. Now, honestly, thank you so much. These are all great questions. I will not have a chance to respond to all of them. I'd love to chat over coffee or whenever. Let me just pick a few that seem very important for me just to expand on. The NPV, so what Claudia said, these have a monetary component and a non-monetary component. How do you make sure that people understand what's happening? There's two things. First, in the news, we try to do it here, but we brought also someone in who is even better with surveys, which is not hard. And in the new survey, it's like crystal clear what the NPV is, because it's the same by design for all of those things. As long as you can read, it should be crystal clear what the NPV is. The results are that we get at least qualitatively the same ordering. So in that sense, I'm pretty confident that this one we can rule out. The understanding, it came up a few times that, do people understand like what is a dividend and stuff like this? First of all, I would argue that people probably understand what a layoff is, and what a gender quota is, they probably understand as well, and what renewable energy is, they probably understand as well too. But just to make sure, we now have comprehension checks in the new round, so that we have open text questions just to make sure that people understand what we're really getting at. Other than that, let me quickly, there were some really cool suggestions. The other things, fairness, distributional concerns, to me, that's all non-pecuniary moral stuff, right? This is precisely what we would be after. It would be, of course, cool if we could delineate this nicely. I hope that by being clear on what the pecuniary part is, we're also clear on what the rest is. Or even though it's not our purpose here to sort of separate this out, like, is it, where do morals come from? That's not our purpose, but it's non-pecuniary utility that we're focused on. I think I should cut it here, and I really apologize to everyone if I didn't get to your questions, but they were very, very helpful to me. Thank you very much.